Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 77 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. 7?
It's the luckiest, I think.
So, yeah,
the luckiest.
The luckiest of all numbers, best of all episodes.
That we've hit so far, at least.
Mark, you got 66.
Yeah, I also got 69.
And he got 77.7, which is God.
Yeah,
What?
God's number.
Yeah, it is. You didn't know that?
That's 77.7.
Well, no, 777.
7 and 7.
Don't misquote me.
Okay. Well, okay. Wait, so what is God's number?
777.
That's God's number?
Yeah, cha-ching, cha-ching on the casino.
Yeah, okay.
God shines down on all the people
The
that
God of
do
gambling.
well at gambling, exactly.
Oh, Gambler. Wasn't that a Simpsons reference? Marge?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay. I'm trying to...
It's a good song.
Yeah. Gambler?
The Gambler?
Oh, the
You
Gambler.
gotta know when to hold him. You gotta know when to fold him.
Kenny Rogers. I'm down with Kenny Rogers. You, Kellen?
Callan's
Big
looking
Ken-
at us like he knows exactly who Kenny Rogers is.
He doesn't appreciate authentic American country and Western music.
Never count your money when you're sitting at the table, Callan.
There'll be time enough to count it when the dealing's
The
done.
dealing's done.
Right? Right or wrong?
Yes.
Good.
And not counting while you're sitting at the table is especially apt this episode because we're talking about hidden information
Beautiful. God.
and why you're
What a
allowed.
segue.
Yeah, I know.
Jesus.
That's what I'm here for. The most beautiful of segues. We're talking about what information you should be allowed to track, reveal, talk about when you're at the board game table, and counting cards, counting components is often a big part of this. Is memory an important part of a board game? Should it be a mechanic in board games? And how do we feel about this in particular in our game groups and when we play games that use hidden trackable information? That's coming up later in the show. Before we get there, let's talk about the games that we've been playing. So, Mark, what have you been playing?
I played Papà Paolo, which is a game about delivering pizzas.
Somehow I guessed that without knowing anything about it.
But it's a game about delivering pizzas where you don't get paid for delivering the pizzas. Strangely, you get paid. I think the game's conceit is you get you're trying to get money by getting sponsorships to your pizzeria, I guess. There's a lot of things that are thematically sort of
Vague.
a little shaky in this game. Like for an action, you can deliver pizzas via rocket ship across. Anyway, so the way this game works, it's a game with a number of different mechanics that are sort of interesting and combine well. But what you're doing in Papala is you've got a little part of the city to your own, and you're building this out by adding tiles to your city, and you're expanding the city, and your goal is to deliver pizzas to the city. Each block of the city can be 1, 2, or 3 houses that are, I guess, requesting pizzas. And if you fill up any particular tile, so if the tile has one house, if you put 1 pizza on that tile, up to 3 houses, if you put all 3 pizzas on those tiles, whenever you complete a block, you get to advance up this tech tree, this pizza tech tree. Yeah.
I love it.
Which allows you to get more money or to make more pizzas or make more deliveries. And the way the game works, just very quickly, is there's a 4x4 grid where you can put a worker on the space and either take that piece to expand your city or take one of the actions on either side of the grid. And the actions you take on the grid are basically based on your tech tree. So if you place a worker on a spot that corresponds to the money action, depending on how far you are along your money tech part of your tree, that's how much money you're going to get. And then there's an area majority aspect to that. So if you have the most workers on a column or row, I think the game's conceit is that you get tipped. So again, this is a strange way to work in the theme. So whoever has the most workers on any column or row gets money. After that, there's a bidding mechanic that is very reminiscent of Cyclades, where there are a number of columns and you're bidding for the right to deliver a number of pizzas. So basically the juiciest column allows you to deliver the most pizzas, and the worst column allows you to deliver the fewest pizzas. Again, I'm not sure how this thematically works, but when you bid for a column, if you're outbid, you have to move your pawn a la Cyclades. Then you deliver pizzas. At the end of the game, the person who's delivered the most pizzas, which is 1 victory point each, plus whoever's advanced most along the tech tree is the winner. It's sort of as convoluted in terms of different mechanics. You've got a worker placement, you've got an area majority, you've got a bidding, you've got a tile laying mechanic, you've got all these things, like even a sort of a pick up and deliver, more of a deliver than a pick up and deliver. A tech tree also. You got all these things going, and it sort of works, but it is sort of disjointed. The theme doesn't integrate as well as you'd like, and also the art is, in my opinion, quite bad. It's very, very clip arty. Very clip arty. I was trying to refresh my memory of this game, and I saw a review where the reviewers complimented the art, and I don't know on what planet this art could be complimented. It's very, very clip arty.
So you're saying Food Chain Magnate stole more than just its theme from Papà Paolo?
That's true. That's true. Although I would say that at least Food Chain Magnate's art is clean. Like the Food Chain Magnate board is like very, very basic, almost could not be more basic. But Papà Paolo, the grid where you place the tiles, it has like a cityscape, but the cityscape that you're placing the tiles on sort of look like the tiles that you're placing on. So like it's sort of hard to tell like if a space is available to put a worker on or if the tiles are already moved, because like the board looks like it has tiles on it, for lack of a better term. So it's just a very busy, mixed up, like unclear board. Also, when you're placing these tiles on to expand your neighborhood, you can only deliver to certain buildings on the tile. So like the tile you have might have like 10 buildings on it, but you have to determine how many of the buildings are actually wanting pizza. And that is often very hard to tell because the shading is very light. There were a number of times where we're saying, wait, is that a neutral building or is that a red building? Like, so it's hard to tell.
So it's like neither artistically appealing or functional.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yes.
madness.
Yeah. It's just weird in that aesthetic respect.
So let me ask you this, Mark.
Yes.
You played a game
I would. Okay.
with artwork
Right.
with the theme of delivering pizza.
Yeah.
And what would you leave the BGB listeners with? Like, what do you want them to know about Papà Paolo?
I would say, while it's an amalgamation of a lot of different mechanics, I would say that in the end, the pizza is a messy one. Too many ingredients ruins the pie, as the old Italian saying goes. So I would say pass on Papà Paolo. And that is alliteration. PPP. Done.
Does Papa have two P's, though?
No.
Papa?
Oh, it does have two P's. Why did I say no to that? So that's Papà Paolo. It's an okay game, but there's just too many strikes against it. You can find better games.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I played Oceanos. Oceanos? Oceanos. I don't know how you pronounce that. Oceanos.
Isn't that the Lost Plane?
What?
Oceanic.
It's a Lost Plane?
From the plane, the movie, the show.
Oh, yes, from the show Lost. Oceanic, yes.
Oh.
Close.
I was very confused for a second. I think it meant like the Lost Plane, like some sort of hyperdimensional plane of
Yeah,
existence.
I was wondering if that was like, I was wondering if that was like Amelia Earhart's plane or something.
Oh.
But it wasn't.
It's historical.
Yeah, historical fiction.
You haven't heard all the country songs about the plane that disappeared?
Sing that one again to me? That one that just came out.
Oh, my darling.
Yep.
Oceanos.
I love it. Oceanus is not about missing planes. It's about submarines. It is a game by Antoine Bauza, who is more widely known as the Seven Wonders designer. I think Hanabi is also probably my favorite Bauza game. So I was excited to try this. The first thing that's apparent when you break out this game is it's beautiful. It's got a bright, colorful sort of cartoon-like art. The premise is you have a submarine that's made up of 5 puzzle pieces. All of the parts of that submarine can be upgraded up to 2 more times over the course of the game. And then the main mechanic is a card drafting system where it works slightly different than your average card drafting, where if it's your turn, if you're the start player, you deal cards to the other players. They choose the card or cards they want, depending on how they use their actions, and you get their discards, and then you choose from those for your tableau. Typically, you're picking one card. You can spend like a fuel token to play more than one, and you're going to play this into the first of 3 rows over the course of the game. What you're trying to do is there are a bunch of different symbols on these cards. So there are different types of fish. You might be trying to get as many types of fish as possible, or you're trying to create clusters of coral over the course of the game. There might be treasure chests where you can place divers on to collect tokens at the end of the game. Some of the cards have these kraken eyes, which are potentially bad. If at the end of any given round you have the most kraken eyes, then you force reveal from the stack of kraken tokens, which could be negative points anywhere between a given range that gets bigger as the game progresses. So you do this over the course of 3 rounds, sort of making 3 rows of cards, and over the course of that, you're also collecting crystals on these cards, which you can then use to upgrade your submarine. So if you get a yellow crystal, say, and then you get an upgrade card, you could swap out one part of your submarine. That might be to either allow you to collect more points from varieties of fish, get more little fuel pods, which allow you to add more cards to each row, the ability to get more cards to look at, to choose from, rather than just the 2 that you start the game with, or just points, flat points at the end of each round. So you have a bunch of different options. You're not going to be able to upgrade all parts of your submarine. So there are some fun choices over there over which you choose. And then you just sort of, over the course of a very quick game, it takes about half an hour to play, building up this row of colorful cards. There are fun little mechanics in this. At the end of the game, if you've placed divers, you send them up through your chain of treasure chests, drawing tokens from a bag. So there's a bunch of different mechanics that all just are very light and fun. I dare say this is more of a family game than anything else. But despite that, I found it really fun to play. It's very simple. Like I said, it takes half an hour to play, and it's just light and loose enough that I found myself interested in wanting to try it again at some point. Mark, you've played this as well, right?
Wait. How many families all over town did you play it with, Neelan? Of your families?
How many of my families? Only one so far. But I'm going to introduce it to the other family at some point in the future. I'm just going to try it with a different family each time. Yeah, exactly.
What if you forget a piece at one house, and then at the next house they say, "Where's
that piece?" And it just got missing en route. Don't worry about it.
Sounds like the beginning of a sitcom. you should get on writing that.
That was a Simpsons reference, you f***ing idiot.
This is our most Simpson-y episode so far. Yeah, I played Oceanos. I liked it. Hearing you talk about it, there's sort of an interesting commonality between Papà Paolo and Oceanos. Because Oceanos, in hearing you recount it, it has all these, like you were saying, like little interesting aspects of it, like the set collection and the spatial aspect where you're trying to group coral and the tech tree. That all those sound interesting. And again, I played them and they are interesting. But for some reason, this game altogether didn't really seem like it was as great as some of its parts to me. I remember I had a good time, I had a fine time, and I would play it over Papà Paolo, I think, because it's quicker and cleaner. But for some reason, it didn't all combine to something that sort of sank its hooks into me. You know what I mean?
I think I get where you're coming from, because it definitely feels like a bunch of mini games almost in one game, and like you almost don't even have to engage with all of them. Like you might ignore entirely the fish. It doesn't force you to sort of have to do everything. Right. Even the way I played it, I was like, okay, I'm just going to do the propeller upgrades, which just gets you 3 points at the end of every round. Right. And that seemed viable, which is kind of dull if you think about it. Like you're not actively playing the game to get points, but I did enjoy that it did feel like I could try something different each time I played it, I guess.
Yeah, and I would definitely play it again much more readily than I think I would Papà Paolo.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to emphasize that this is an extremely simple game. Like it's not going to blow you away strategically or anything like that. But for a game that took a clean 20 to 30 minutes and was very easy to teach, and has kind of that sort of just that, again, toy factor is not quite right, but like fun very playfulness to it. Exactly.
Very
in
colorful,
attractive package.
Cartoony,
yeah, definitely very, very pleasant.
Fun fact, I bought this game, read the rules, set it up at game night. For whatever reason that I can't recall, we did not play it. I put it away, and then I sold it.
Okay.
Why did you sell it?
Who can say?
That is Oceanos by Aiello Games. Oh, yes. Sorry.
Are you going to introduce me?
Sorry. Yeah. I'm going to just sit here until someone speaks.
I just kept pointing at it and then gesturing towards myself.
Kellen, did you play something?
Well, I'm excited to be the guy talking about the games that people actually want to hear about this week.
Wait, Papà Paolo and Oceanos? Aren't that?
This is another PP game.
Oh.
If you have not heard the hype and hotness, this is Pax Pamir 2nd Edition. The Pax series is a very heavy series of games, mostly by Phil Eklund, but this one is by Cole Worley of Root fame. This is a re-implementation of the 1st edition of Pax Pamir that has been streamlined, reduced, stripped down. Pax Pamir 2nd Edition is about the 19th century in the Afghan region. It is about players playing local Afghan leaders and how they are interacting with the relevant forces in the region. So that's the Afghan military, the British military, as well as the Russian military and diplomats. So there is a board, there is a card tableau, and you are buying cards from that tableau and you're playing them in front of you to form your court. And you're using those cards to do further actions, because up until you have cards in your tableau, all you're able to do is buy cards and play cards. But once you have cards in front of you, those unlock new actions and abilities that allow you to interact and move around on the board, as well as interacting with other people's courts. What's interesting about the game is that there are 4 dominance checks throughout the game, and during those checks, you check to see if one of the factions is dominant. And remember, every player is not controlling one of these factions. Everyone is allied with a faction. And when you do that dominance check, if one faction is dominant, whoever has the most points, whoever is most allied with that faction will score the most points. And if no faction is dominant, then whoever has spread out the most and used the most influence to get their tribes and spies out on the board will score some points. So the game is about shifting allegiances and reading the board state and figuring out which group is going to be in power and when the dominance checks are going to come. It's a game of timing. It's a game of things turning on a dime. So many of the cards in the game have an allegiance to Russia, to Britain, and to the local Afghan coalition. And if you buy one of those cards and play it, it must be who you're in an alliance with, or you have to shift your alliance right then. And doing that forces you to discard all your cards, all your gifts, all your bonuses related to the group that you're previously allied with. So this is a big change move. When someone does this, everyone around the table goes, oh no, like what's going on? Like what is that person planning? So this is a very complicated game to describe. This is a very complicated game to play and get through. What do you guys think about Pax Pamir 2nd Edition? We played this all together.
So I've played it just the once. I know you guys have both played it twice. Our game had an interesting ending to it. But in terms of my overall thoughts on the game, I was intrigued. I enjoyed it. I would like to play it again. I'm a sucker, as I've said before, for games that are steeped in a historical period, and this is, in my opinion, quite richly steeped. Like the other PAX games, the cards are loaded with flavor text that I just love. I absolutely love how much information is on the cards. But the shifting alliances, the big sort of swingy moves, the buying the cards on the tableau, the dominance checks, all that stuff was stuff that I was just clicking with, was appealing to me. And again, it just feels like a cop-out or a cliche or whatever, but it feels like a game that would improve on multiple plays, and it's the type of game that I wish I could guarantee that I'd play a number of times. I am eager to play it again.
I'm actually struggling to think of a game that I've felt more conflicted on, because there is so much that is very interesting about Pax Pamir. I do love, similar to something like Imperial 2030, which is a game we've played before, where what seems like the battle playing out on the board is actually one that you're not actively participating in necessarily. So these factions are fighting each other and you're allied with them and sort of to some extent controlling their units, but those allegiances change. Like I might be sort of advancing Russia's agenda for most of the game and then switch to a different faction to advance my own agenda later in the game. And that's very interesting. It almost feels like there's a battle happening on the board and you're just trying to find the best place and the best time to sort of make your move within what's happening. There are also very interesting ways where the game very dramatically shifts in tempo. When one of these dominance cards comes up, it suddenly becomes this like, oh shit moment around the board table where everyone's like, who's going to be able to get this? Does anyone have enough coins? Because the way those cards works, you sort of have to spend coins to get them the further out on the board they are. There's almost this tempo of like building up coins so that when the dominance card comes out, you can get to it. But then you also have to be in a position, because of the complexities of how the dominance check works, you sort of have to be able to sway the dominance check to your favor, then get the dominance check. So there's a lot of interesting, very big moments that happen over the course of the game. That said, I also felt like for a game that's about, 2.5 hours long, at both times we played it, how intensely dramatic those moments are and how swingy they are and how sort of crazily they change the state of the game often feels like something that's out of your control. I think the game is about your ability to respond to that chaos, but in both games, there were big moments where I just felt like, okay, if this card comes up, I literally lose. Or if a different card comes up, I could sort of potentially work this to my advantage, but there were times where I felt like I was forced down specific roads based on cards that came out. I don't love that in a game where you sort of felt like I was railroaded down a specific path despite what I had been planning for, not necessarily the entire game, because it would be a fool's errand to sort of have a long-term strategy in this game, but at least for a couple of turns when I feel like I know what I want to do and then the game drastically alters. I don't typically love that in the game, and this felt like the most severe form of that.
It is very important that you are paying the utmost attention to the card row. It's a game where you want to be able to do other things than the cards that are available to you. So at the beginning of the game, you're sort of looking at, well, what cards are free and what cards cost 1, and how can I start to set up some sort of engine or combo. But you may be in a position where the first 5 sets of cards don't let you place tribes onto the board. And so no one is going to be ruling regions. So if that's what you wanted to do, too bad. That's not going to be happening for at least the first third of the game. Beyond anything, this is perhaps the most tactical game I have ever played. And when it becomes your turn, that thought of like, oh, I could do a big move, right? I could change something so drastically. It also does a great thing. It solves, in my opinion, in a 3-player game, if 2 people are going for one resource and one person is going for another resource, usually the person who's going for the resource on their own is going to come out ahead. But in Pax Pamir, all 3 players could be allied with the same faction, and that would be interesting. It could be 2 versus 1, but it's not really 2 versus 1, because the 2 aren't necessarily trying to work together because they want to be in first place. It solves that problem very cleanly and in a very smart way. And I do think it's reminiscent of Imperial 2030 in that way. Pax Pamir is crazy. I don't know if it's a game for me, and I think one of the things that I've seen among all the popular reviews is sort of this, it may not be for me, but it's for someone out there. And that is also, in my mind, a bit of a cop-out. I'm not sure with this game. I'm not sure I'm going to keep my copy of Pax Pamir. I'd be interested in playing it again, but I'm not sure I'm going to be the one suggesting Pax Pamir 2nd Edition. I did not feel like I had enough control. Both games we played, it's about this tempo, and right up until the end, anyone could win, right? And the game actually will stop if player gets more than 4 points ahead. The game just ends on its own, which is good. But, the dominance cards are hidden in this giant deck of cards a la Pandemic. And when the last one comes up, it's one of the last 10 cards in the game. And if it comes up on your turn, you might win. And if it doesn't, and we literally had that situation in our second game where if the dominance card would have come out, Neelan would not have been able to win. And we were trying to cycle the deck to make that happen, and then it came out on his turn. And that's not to say he wasn't in the leading position, because he absolutely was. But it just feels like it's so tight, it's so close, that I'm unsure that you have enough control over what's happening on the board. And this is crazy from someone who's an innovation lover.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's actually genuinely surprising. It seemed like, because I remember you initially describing it as innovation and Glory to Rome like, and I definitely see that comparison, but your distinctly different reaction to both of the way that those games sort of operate in a similar way of controlling chaos is perhaps surprising. And maybe it's a function of the game length, of the game weight.
Yeah, and I'm not ready to write the game off by any means and would play it again, but I don't know that I enjoy it enough to play it too many more times.
There is something that is admirable about what you described, where every player does feel like they're in it. Because in both the games I played, like I was in the situation in the first game where I was on 0 points and could have won right at the end of the game. Then in the second game we played, the same thing happened where the third player we were playing with was on 0 points, and they said, well, there's a 1 in 4 chance that I win, depending on the card that comes up. And that's kind of a crazy thing, that no player is ever truly out of it to some extent. But yeah, again, like that sort of elaborate swinginess just seems crazy for me.
It is a hard one to understand who to recommend it to. I don't think that liking Root, Cole Worley's darling, is any indication whether you're like Pax Pamir. If you enjoy the type of theme like Mark is talking about, there's tons of flavor text. It's very intriguing in that way, and the artwork is gorgeous. The production is gorgeous. It's got a cloth board. It's a very, very unique game, and I'm glad to have experienced it, and I'm glad to probably sell it while the getting is good.
Before we move on, and we'll be coming back to Pax Pamir later, let's have a review. This is, as always, one of the best ways that you can support the show. If you leave us a review on Apple Podcast or on Stitcher or on Facebook, we like to read them out on the show. It's a good way to support us, get the podcast promoted. Otherwise, if you've already done that or you don't want to do that, tell a friend about the show. It's always super helpful if you spread the word. This review comes from Rosworm. It is titled Gloomhaven, Gloomhaven, Gloomhaven.
The hell does that have to do with us?
This is one of the older reviews, but I think this is a reference to an episode we were just saying Gloomhaven a lot. Does anyone remember that? There was an episode where we were just like repeatedly saying Gloomhaven because Gloomhaven is a hot game.
Yeah, to make people like us.
Exactly, to get the SEO.
It worked.
Okay, this review goes as follows. I'm not sure where my life went, but I just finished listening to all 61 episodes over the past month because of being off from work from disability. This podcast helped accompany me as emotional support in my return to work. Time has flown by, and it's hard to believe I'm all caught up and now have to wait each week to hear this podcast again. All three of them feel like I'm personally part of their group, as close friends, knowing all their inside jokes, likes and dislikes, from BTB to vocabulary lessons. They focus on just a few games each week and return to their favorites so the listener gets more in-depth flavor of each game, and what works for them or not has prevented me from falling into the cult of the new, as Mark recommends waiting at least a year before deciding to buy a new game, because it will either be cheaper, tradable, or we'll come to find it won't last the test of time because of Kellen's law.
Kellen's law. Wait, what's my law?
Who can say?
Who can say?
Actually, who can say probably is your law. Anyway, the only knock I have about this trio podcast that's only composed of 2/3 Mensa members. So I think this podcast deserves 9 out of 10 because a 9 is close to 10. Yeah, that's fair, says Neelan.
The voice of reason.
Yeah.
That was such a sweet review.
That's a solid.
That was so awesome. That was great.
That one's really good. Thank you so much, Rosworm, for writing in.
I'm worried he knows our intimate secrets. Just another shout out we wanted to give was that our first bonus Patreon episode has been released. So if you're interested in hearing more of the Board Game Barrage podcast, you can find that at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon or patreon.com/boardgamebarrage. Thanks.
We'll just keep rearranging the letters and it'll probably work.
Board Game Barrage, patreon.com.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's get into our feature topic. We're going to be talking about information that is trackable but hidden trackable information, as it's often called, and how much is appropriate to reveal at a given point in time. Like, if information is calculable from the board state, is it appropriate to calculate it? Is it appropriate to say it? Is it appropriate to announce it to the table or share it with other players? How much should you be allowed to ascertain from the board state if the rules don't specifically tell you that you're not supposed to? This was inspired by our first game of Pax Pamir.
Second edition.
Our first game of Pax Pamir, second edition, 3 players on the 4th of July. No, that's not true.
Oh, do we want the neutral third party to tell the story?
Who's the neutral third party?
Oh, maybe that's a good idea. Yeah,
Am I
okay.
the neutral third party?
Yeah, you absolutely
I am
are.
the
Because
neutral third party.
okay.
I like being the arbiter.
Yeah, well, just to set this up, this was a contentious issue between Callan and I. And
There were slurs used.
that's
We'll have you guess who the slurs originated from.
You'd be surprised.
So I guess what happened in the game was it came down to the very end. Neelan was in third place, but had set himself up in such a way that if the last dominance check had come out with the Russian alliance in dominance and he had been the only person to score, he would have scored enough points to win the game. And so the dominance card is out. It's Neelan's turn. He has enough money to acquire it. And he asks... Now, I'm wary at this point because I don't remember the exact verbiage, and I think it's probably key to the issue. Can you...
Yeah,
what's your
as
recollection?
I remember it, it would have probably have been something like this. Am I right, guys? If I do this, if I buy this card, that's it, right? That's 10 points, I win.
Okay. How do you remember it, counselor?
I mean, I think you got to let him finish.
Okay.
So you said that. Right?
Yeah.
And then give us approximate length of times.
So and imagine in this case, I'm holding coins in my hand. I'm sort of like tapping them on the edge of the card. Where as I run the coin through my fingers.
Fidgeter.
I'm sort of like, miming out the action of like, okay, I'm going to be placing coin, buy the dominance card. This is it, right? This is it. I win. I look towards Mark.
Right.
Mark nods at me and very verbally confirms.
I think I verbally confirmed, yes.
So I say, okay, I'll do it. Right. I put the coins out.
No, wait, didn't you ask?
No, well,
so there was no
question to
I didn't
you.
think
Well,
it
there was no
specifically
pause and look at Kellen and then wait, right? Because we didn't have a moment at all. Because
you would have a brief period of time, I would say, but
no, we didn't lock eyes. Because if we would have locked eyes, you would have paused.
Yeah,
and
no, you're right. I would have asked it to the table in a roundabout way.
Wait
I don't think
for
I
me to
looked
say
at
anything.
Kellen and was like, Kellen.
But this was about a 4-second. This wasn't a 20-second thing.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So a couple of seconds pass, and I just follow through. I put the coins out. I buy the card. I'm like, okay, that's it. Mark, please continue.
So then Neelan and I had forgotten that Kellen was I forget what I forgot, to be honest.
Yeah.
But Kellen was in second place. He had switched allegiances to Russian late in the game, and because he was in second place, he scored the second place points, which in the final dominance checks are doubled, which allowed him to sneak past Nealon and take the win.
Right.
And so there was a question as to whether or not Kellen should have said something at that point, letting Nealon know that he was not going to win the game by taking the dominance card.
Kellen, your response.
Well, we haven't got to the part where you called me a dick.
Okay, I will admit, in a moment of weakness, and loyal listeners of the podcast will know that this was an intense moment of weakness for your lovable, kind co-host, Nealon. I said to Kellen, I asked you if this was going to play out the way I said it was going to play out, and you deliberately didn't say anything. That's a dickish thing to do.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
Hours, probably.
We've probably discussed this for hours at this point.
So I had switched allegiance to Russia 3 or 4 turns ago, banking on the fact that if you won first place and I got second, I would get 1 more point than you. And then for the next 2 or 3 turns, I was waiting to be found out. I was waiting for Mark even to notice, because Mark would immediately start politicking that information and say, because what Nealon was doing was setting up the board, was fighting with Mark to make sure that Russia was dominant.
Right.
And that was helping me, and Nealon didn't realize that. So Nealon at that point had failed to understand the game state. And I want to be very, very, very precise and clear. It wasn't that you didn't know the rules.
Yeah.
It was just that you hadn't, calculated it out, so to speak.
Actually, it's interesting to try sort of divine, especially in memory, what was going through my head at that point from a combination of board state and rules. Because like you said, I knew the rule was 5-3-1, right? I knew you had switched to Russia. I even knew you were in second place. But I had been coming from a point for a large part of the game where I was the only person allied to Russia. So in my head, I just had this continual 10 points, 10-0-0, I get the win.
No one else.
That's it. Yeah. And at the point that game that had changed, which was obviously as soon as Kellen switched to Russia, which was, again, not necessarily something you sneakily did. I was aware that it happened when it happened, but the state hadn't switched in my head.
Right.
I hadn't gone from 10-0-0 to 10-6-0.
Right. Yes.
So there's this tension, right, where I'm waiting to be found out by Mark. Mark's going to do the math, or Nealon's going to do the math and say, oh, actually, Nealon, you need to do something different. And then suddenly we'd be at upheaval again. And so it gets to almost the second to last or third to last turn, or it could be the last turn. And then you ask that question. I froze. I was like, oh, shit. No matter what I say, because if I say, well, maybe you should think about that more, or even I don't want to say, any of that would have revealed how
you were planning to win the game.
How I was planning to win the game. And so I said nothing. And I guess the hard thing for me is that your position is that it's my obligation to help you parse the board state.
Not entirely.
It wasn't a rules check.
No. My position is that in asking you a question, a very specific question, which was partly... because to be clear, this is quite a complex game. It's if I am understanding the way this game works correctly, if I do this, will the following happen?
So I guess where I agree and disagree, I agree that if I had said, oh yeah, Nealon, you're going to win the game if you do that, that's completely unacceptable, abhorrent behavior. Right. But then, so there's kind of 2 discussions here, right? Because you did it, and then there was a discussion about, well, can we take it back? Right? A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Because at that point that I had done it, and you're like, oh, wait, no, I get 6 points. And I'm like, okay, well, then I'm obviously not going to do that then.
And it's well, you just...
You did it, is what you said.
Yeah, well, because you did. You ended the game, you used action, you used your agency on your turn, and you did something that didn't help you. And so my question to you is, what makes the last turn of the game different than the second turn of the game when your job is to parse the board state and figure out what would be most advantageous for you as a player?
I think specifically it would be honestly, from my perspective, it's the most important time because this is like the single pivotal moment in 2.5 hours of playing the game, right? I understand that from your perspective, especially when you're in the position. I can be sympathetic to the idea of me asking you the question puts you in a very awkward position where you're like, your 2.5 hours are also up in the air at this point. Like, if I divulge this information, I may not win. And that would suck for you. At the same time, it definitely sucked for me. To me, it felt like in the interest of preserving the social part of what a board game is, the social decorum, me asking a point-blank question about, a mechanical process didn't feel like quite the same thing as, hey, tell me your strategy here, Kellen. Tell me what you're going to try to do to win and tell me how I can beat you. That's the gray area we're playing in, is like, was my question more mechanical? Was it a function of information that I did not have, or was it a question about your strategy?
Mark?
So my opinion is that I think it's tough. God. My opinion,
you must choose.
Yes, if I'm going to arbitrate here, I fall on Kellen's side.
What?
Twist. Because what this reminds me of the most is chess, and like a fork in chess. Like, you can play a piece in such a way that you are now attacking two of the opponent's pieces, right? And like, is it your obligation to tell your opponent that, hey, if you put your piece there, you're going to put me in a situation where I can attack now two of your pieces? It's like, it's hard with a long board game and like a complicated one, because there can be the argument that like I've forgotten something, but I just feel like the memory aspect, the ability to like parse the board, is part of the game. And so if you mess that up, even though some of it feels like a technicality, it feels like, oh, it should have been open. It feels to me like that's a misplay, that's a mistake, and you lose. Like that's just a mistake. You put yourself in a position.
Loser.
It's ultimately your responsibility to know the board state. And again, I get that this is like on the fringes of being a gray area, but I think in that situation, it's hard to argue against the way Kellen handled it. I think
my counter to like chess specifically is chess is a game where presumably if you're playing chess,
I know what you're going to say.
You have the rules internalized. There are no complexities to the way something is going to play out,
That's
right?
True. Yeah.
The board state is the game of chess, right? To my perspective, to a game as complex as Pax Pamir, especially once we're playing it for the first time,
right, of course.
The idea that I would have internalized all of its systems, I don't know. I'm not going to say it's absurd, because again, if you haven't internalized the systems by halfway through the game, then you're not playing the game really. But at the same time, in a friendly social situation where we're all playing and learning the game together, I feel like the complexities of the question twist, right?
Yeah.
We're not talking about a tournament scenario. We're not talking about me versus you in a battle of wits. We're playing a 2.5 hour game communally.
Yeah, I get that. I just feel like, I don't want to use like the slippery slope argument, but I don't know how you can argue that Kellen's behavior was wrong. Like, if you're going to score this out of 100, I just don't know how you drop Kellen below the 50-point threshold.
And I think that makes sense, honestly. Like, in talking about this more with Kellen, I've come to sympathize with his position, which is, if I were to ask you this point blank, I might have reacted the same way, which is like, oh, wait, what? Like, I don't know how to respond to this in a way that doesn't entirely give what I've been working towards away, right? I do think where it crossed the line for me was the insistence that, no, you've done it, it's over, I've won, we're done. The game is over, there's no argument here, there's no like... Because the other thing that we realized in talking about it is that Kellen would probably have won regardless. Even if I sort of had spent my turn trying to counter him, it would have been very hard for Kellen not to have won.
So then, Mark, the next question is, right, because you've absolved me of guilt. I did nothing wrong. So we're done.
Yeah.
But so our group is very forgiving in terms of undo until new information is entered into the system.
Yeah.
So at that point, my insistence that the game was over and that we couldn't roll it back,
right.
Do you agree with that? Or at that point, would you allow the game to be rolled back?
I think you're within your rights. I would not have done that. I would have allowed the rollback.
And I think in all honesty, like, I would have too. I know that's very hard to say because I wasn't in your position, but I wasn't even asking to like roll back an entire round of the game. It's like I literally picked up the card.
And my perspective was that what you were asking to roll back was the new knowledge that you had gained as a result of asking a question or doing a move that you misread the board state.
That's exactly why I say you're well within your right. I think it's inarguable that your position is defensible, just not the way I think I would have done it.
What makes it so interesting, right, is that Pax Pamir 2nd edition, the hidden trackable information is just your hands. So many players of the game actually play with open hands. I went online and looked, and the online implementation that existed prior to the game coming out was with open hands as well. So literally at any point you could calculate the entire state of the board. And in fact, much of our metagaming and much of our politicking in the game is around that type of discussion where we say, well, Paxton, if you let Neelan do this right now, then the score is going to do this, this, and this. And so we're a group that leans into that, and that makes it complicated because there are many games that obfuscate some of the victory conditions or some of the victory points where it's not that clear. So Neelan allowing you to test your hypothesis of if I do this action, do I win, to me felt like something that we couldn't roll back at that point because you had basically just learned what I was doing or how I was going to sneak attack you for the win.
What was especially interesting to me about this discussion in its entirety is I think that, correct me if I'm wrong here, I feel like from our initial reactions, we advanced somewhat towards a middle ground where, in all honesty, I'm not that obstinate about the fact that I was in the right for doing this. I think it's such a weird, specific gray area that it's really kind of hard for me to know how I would have reacted in your situation.
Yeah, I think because truly, and it gets really nuanced and specific, if someone on their last turn of Power Grid or of Agricola is trying to say, you know, I've got two options, one is to buy this sheep and one is to buy this house, our group will very often help them calculate the point difference because they're going to do it. And, you know, is the idea that the multiplication of 4 times 3 plus 7, you know, is that their responsibility to do that or not? To me, in the interest of just speeding the whole thing along, like we should just calculate it out together.
Right.
And that's how it gets hard, I think, specifically for us playing Pax Pamir in that way.
So that was, I think, the inciting incident for this discussion. Let's look at some other examples of games that sort of might introduce interesting situations like this and sort of, you know, just go around and ask how we would react in the specific situations. Kellen, do you want to start us off?
Sure. All right, guys, we are playing The Resistance.
I love this game.
We are in the 5th mission, and we're really trying to know if we can trust person A or person B. And the question comes up, who voted no on the first mission? As a broad question to the table. So, A, does anyone have to answer? And B, can you lie?
I think the answer to me is actually super clear. In the case of The Resistance, you don't have to answer and you can lie. But I think that's built into the fabric of the game.
And that would be my answer as well.
Like, I think lying is a healthy proportion of what some of the players are doing in that game.
So the game contains trackable information.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have no duty to help someone recollect what has honestly happened throughout the game.
I think that the reason why I say that is because if you're caught in that lie, that's a risk you're taking, which is the fundamental crux of lying in Resistance at all, is that you might get found out.
And I think part of the intent of the design of the game is to foster like paranoia and like just this air of questioning what people are saying and this deception.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You want some of the information to be questionable, to be sort of potentially distrustful.
Oh, I 100% agree, just to be clear. And I've used this a lot of times to just make someone so livid,
right?
Because you said, no, Mark.
Or even
Mark
just suggest that someone failed a mission that they didn't earlier in the game. Yeah.
But it is a question about the board state or the previous board state.
Yeah.
And you are answering it. When do you have a duty to actually answer the question honestly or not? Mark, give us a hypothetical.
My example is going to be, I think, what feels like the classic example when this hidden trackable information debate comes up, which is Tigris and Euphrates.
Yeah, that was going to be mine as well.
Okay, yeah. The idea that you are acquiring cubes throughout the game, the information is completely trackable, but you put these cubes behind your screen, so theoretically, all this information is available at the end of the game, but the scoring of the game hinges on however many cubes you have. So theoretically, in the final round, you should know exactly where you stand, but the only thing that's preventing you is your inability to remember And there is great debate online as to whether or not Tigris Euphrates should be played with open information without screens.
And do you play with open information?
I do not.
And why is that?
Because I think that's part of the fun. I think the reveal is part of the fun. Even though, again, theoretically, if everybody had perfect memories, that wouldn't be required. And if everybody had like a piece of paper and pen, wouldn't be required. But I think part of the fun in Tigris and Euphrates is being unsure about where you stand. How do you guys feel about that specific example, or maybe that genre?
This was definitely the game that felt like the most compelling example to me, because what you're describing is everything. It's literally the win state. It's the victory condition. So if a player in their game is keeping perfect information of everyone's cubes, is it in the spirit for them to announce, well, no, hang on, Mark only needs one more of this cube color and then he wins? Like, that feels so distinctly wrong in the game of Tigris and Euphrates to me, because of exactly what you're describing. Like, the surprise, the uncertainty, not knowing feels like everything in that game.
Right.
Right? Like, not knowing exactly what Mark needs to do in order to get the one crucial cube he needs to win is a huge chunk of that game. I don't know how I would even feel about playing that with open information. It would become a much more staid game,
right,
where you're just trying to knock down whoever has, the most cubes.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think playing with hidden information does, is it sort of mitigates the bash the leader issue a little bit, because you don't know exactly who the leader is. What do you think, Colin?
100%. And I think it reduces analysis paralysis, right, to allow for some fuzziness around the edges. Mm-hmm. And Pax Pamir, second edition, doesn't have that fuzziness. It's quite hard. It's quite harsh. If there was even the possibility of having one victory point extra hidden in Pax Pamir, we wouldn't have argued at all, because there would be no way for Neelan to even ask the question that he asked.
Yeah.
So in Tigris and Euphrates specifically, of course, you would not want to play with open information. The hard thing about that is I don't like to acknowledge that memory is a fun component of the game to test. That's not what I'm saying when I say that. Right. What I'm saying is that the game is more fun when people are not analyzing 1,000 potential options, when analysis paralysis is reduced and the speed of the game is sped up. Misplays make interesting things happen.
Right.
It's funny because I see this argument that hidden information speeds up games, and I want to agree with it, but I feel like, why is that true? Because if the information was open, wouldn't there still be the calculation? I guess the calculation would be as laborious because you would have all the information out there, but you still, if a player is going to calculate every turn, he's going to calculate every turn. It's going to slow the game down either way. Maybe he doesn't slow it down as much, but if you're going to have calculating players, you're going to have them in either respect.
Yeah, I think that a player could still lead to the same situation, because you could start speculating over the hidden information to the nth degree. But I do think access to more information gives you more avenues of calculation.
Sure.
It's about heuristics, right? And the Castillo in El Grande is a great example where you're placing pieces into the tower, and you sometimes lose, you lose track because there's 5 players, everyone's putting pieces in, and what you remember is, oh man, Neelan put a lot in that round, or in Tigris and Euphrates, Mark has a lot of blue.
Right.
And that fuzziness makes it so that the last couple turns of the game don't devolve into weird metagaming where someone could say, no, you can't let him have that, or he'll win the game. Another great example of this is I'm the Boss, one of my absolute favorite negotiation games. Everyone is scoring money. You're making deals, making alliances to make those deals, and you're scoring money, but you can literally track how much money everyone has.
Right.
And then near the end of the game, someone could theoretically say, and someone in my group that I played this game with, can say, no, you can't let Neelan have 11 million. He has 37 million, and then he'll be in first place.
Right.
So the end of the game breaks. It devolves.
Yeah.
There is still some, at the end of a game of I'm the Boss, there is some question of when the game will end, and that's the only fuzziness that the game gives you, is each turn there's an increasing chance that the game could end. But, would you allow a player to, for example, and this is a question, and many people don't play like this, would you allow players to take notes during any board games? Yes or no?
When you say would you allow, I would say that if I was playing with people who play that way, I would play that way. That's fine. I think there is something that you gain by playing Tigris and Euphrates open that you lose when you play it closed. It's a different game. So, I'm not averse to, trying this other version of Tigris and Euphrates, or trying hidden information games with open information. It's not my preferred way of doing it, but I would not say I refuse to play this game open.
I think at my table, if it was, a night I was hosting or a game I was hosting, I would definitely say no. Like, if you ask specifically, can I take notes? I'd be like, no, this is not that sort of game.
Yeah, and to be fair, that would be my thing. Like, if I'm hosting it, if I'm running the game, I'm not going to allow one player to do it.
But exactly. If you're joining a game where everyone thinks that that's the way we play the game, I'm like, okay.
Yeah, and if I saw people playing Tigris and Euphrates open information and they want another player, I might still play it. Like, it's not my preferred way, but I feel like it's a different game and something I might want to try.
A good example of this for me is of a game that feels very fundamentally different whether you play with open or closed information is Through the Ages. And the reason that this becomes apparent is because I've been playing this mostly in the digital implementation where all hidden information is made available on the app to the extent that actually it's stuff that I never even thought to consider when I was playing it in the physical game. Like, what is the probability that this card was contributed by this person versus this person in the events deck? It exposes all of that in the app. And it does fundamentally change the game in a way that, because it's a digital game and one that you play asynchronously, having the information almost makes it feel like a different game because you're much more analytical about your decisions because you're not at the whims of waiting for someone else to take their turn. It's a game that I actually enjoy a lot, not necessarily more, but in a very different sort of way. It caters to that I'm going to overanalyze all of this information because I have the time to do it without being at the cost of other people playing, and play it that way. And it works absolutely.
So it is time for the return of the
hot question.
Wow.
Given a lack of information in the rule book, how would you rule in the most broad way possible? Is a player allowed to count the amount of cards remaining in a deck, count the amount of cards remaining in a discard pile, and look through the cards in the discard pile?
It's
completely absent from the rulebook.
I would say I would try to glean the designer's intent based on the game. That's how I would do it.
Cop out.
Why? No, I think, okay, so what, you are looking for a hard and fast rule for each? I disagree with that. I think you
can't disagree with a question.
I disagree with the answer I'm supposing you have to this question.
I fundamentally disagree with the answer that I haven't heard, but I definitely know that you have to the question. I'm the opposite. I think that in almost all cases, you should be allowed to count. Like, if we have a thinning deck, and this actually came up in Pax Pamir again, if you have a thinning deck and you want to know, like, how many cards are left in this deck, because I need to know, like, how close we are to dominance check, it feels weird not to allow someone just to count the deck versus trying to glean it from the height of the deck, which you're doing anyway.
My answer is just that don't be a tryhard. Don't look through the discard pile. Don't count. Now, many rule books will stipulate, right? They'll say, yes, you can look through the discard pile.
It's interesting that you bring up the tryhard thing, because what struck me about our game of Pax Pamir is that when you didn't allow Nealon to count the number of cards left over in the deck, honestly, that struck me as a tryhard action. That struck me as like putting your chance of success over the fun of the game.
I think that, and I was anticipating this question, I think one of our future topics is going to be about speeding up how we play board games. And I think that our group plays board games about 30 to 40% too slowly.
Absolutely.
And that giving more information to the players is part of the problem, and allowing rollbacks is part of that problem. And that I started adjudicating my new philosophy without telling you.
Yeah, conveniently on the last turn of Pax Pamir, he started doing this.
But to say that unless the rule book is adamant that that's where the hot question comes from.
Yeah.
To me, if the rule book is specific about it, of course. But in the absence of that, I would say, no, you're not supposed to be counting. The idea that, that's a blended deck, right? Those dominance cards are blended in somewhere near the end of the deck. The idea is that you're not supposed to know that it can't possibly come up in the next two cards. I don't think that that's something that you're supposed to have access to.
Okay. The argument that you're speeding the game up by not letting Nealon see there are 3 cards left seems...
Well, many games tell you can't know that.
Sure.
Right? That's not uncommon.
Yeah, I get that.
So then in the absence of that information, you're the one who said you're unwilling to make a ruling. Have a stance, man. I'm serious. At least I'm willing to say what my opinion is. You're saying the context matters, bro.
Yeah, and I stand behind that because I think...
like, that's not absurd that it would depend on the game.
Yeah, I think you can glean.
So you think you could... Okay, that's fine. Yeah. I understand.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
Even though I was flipping you off.
Yeah.
In Pax Pamir, let's say we're ignoring the tryhard part of it, because there is the tryhard part of it.
Yeah.
Do you think that the design is intended that you're supposed to know that there's 14 cards left, so it's impossible for the next 4 cards to have the dominance card?
Yeah, I don't think you're supposed to know that, but
counting it would allow you to glean that information.
Sure, no, I get that. But when we're at a situation where there's clearly like 2 or 3 or 4 cards, I mean,
right?
I don't know,
that it's one out of
That feels right.
So another example I had that I thought was fun and alluded to something you said earlier is Gods of Atlantis, where every player has, at all points in time, they have 5 cards in their hand, and there's a bunch of information on those cards. And you see those cards over the course of any given round. You'll see all of them. And the question that has often come up when we played this is, if I ask you how much damage your attack card does, should I tell you? I actually would probably align with Kellen on this. I think it slows our games down to the point that the game actually does not support or actually doesn't make the game play as intended. I think the game should be played faster and looser without that information so that you make mistakes more frequently. And I think this is a little bit of what you're trying to sort of lead towards. Like those sort of mistakes, those misplays are the interesting moments in a lot of games. And the way we've traditionally played Gods of Atlantis has probably made it take twice as long as intended.
Yeah, I think we have kind of agreed that our next play of Guards of Atlantis, we're going to use some kind of timer system to really try to speed it up so dramatically. You know, I would love to try a game of El Grande where everyone has 10 seconds to make their move and just see what that does, because you'll get through it quick and there'll be a lot of fun, different things happening in the game. And I just think it's quite fascinating.
Yeah. There would be more big, funny moments, and you would want to just play it again more immediately.
In general, I love the idea of playing any game with a clock. I just, theoretically, whenever we've talked about this, it always seems like such a great idea to play it with a timer.
I have the clock.
Yeah.
I bought the timer, but the blue tank and the orange tank think it's like it's an alliance against them.
Targeted against us.
The Turn Turtles. My last little example is a game where you play a card, you put a piece of information out on the board, and then the game tells you you're not allowed to like look at it again. An easy example is Survive, Escape from Atlantis. You have meeples that are worth different amounts of points. And when you put them out on the board, one of them is quite a bit more valuable to you than another. And the game says that you're not supposed to ever look at them again. And then halfway through the game, that game is pandemonium.
Right.
You've forgotten which meeple is your strong one. Are you allowed to look at it again?
No, because it says in the rules you're not.
Try hard.
It's designer's intent.
Yeah, but that is the most basic, perhaps simplest memory element, right? It's something that you have put out into the board. No one else has access to it.
I mean, I get the argument that memory is not supposed to be part of the game or the memory is not fun, but I don't really agree with it. I mean, memory is just another skill. If a player who can do probability calculations, you wouldn't say that we should punish them or we should like handicap them or not reward them.
But memory is not listed on the BGG profile for the game, you idiot. Clearly not the designer's intent. Context matters, dude.
No, it is the designer's intent, because if it's part of the game, it's the designer's intent. If it's a component of the game, it's clearly the designer's intent.
Who are you to tell us of the great doctor's intent? Dr. Reiner Knizia.
I just read the rule book. I'm reading the
doctor.
gospel of the doctor, and I'm interpreting his words as written.
Every game of the Dr. Reiner Knizia's is B, T, B.
We'll leave it at that.
And
people who know our show Bible will know what that means.
Scene.
That is going to do it for the discussion of hidden information in games. And that's going to do it for episode 77 of the show. Thank you all so much for listening. As always, we want to mention the Discord, which is a great place to hang out and talk about board games. There's a lot of thriving conversation that happens there. It's a fantastic little community that we're building over there. That is at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Otherwise, you can reach us on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, or you can email us directly at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. Thank you all so much for listening to the show. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for letting us use What's on Your Mind Kid as our intro and outro music. Goodbye.
See ya.
We will be at Gen Con 2019, a convention in Indianapolis. Come hang out with us. We don't know when, but join the Discord so we can hang out.
Oof, Mark did it better.
I'm going to loop that.
Was that necessary, Neil?
All right.
I just do not know what has happened to you. First, you're calling me a dick. Now you're insulting me on the show.
I agree with everything.
Thought you were a gentle giant.
Gentle giant.
darling.
Yep.
Oceanos. Oh, my darling. Oh, my darling. Oh, my darling. Oceanos.